Hello and welcome to the stream. We're enjoying some coffee and we're going to be building some APIs. Let's get started. So, what are we doing today? We're going to build a to-do API. I've got a project, I've got a repository. We're all good to go. I've created some models. We're going to focus on the API today instead of focusing on anything else. So let's dive in. This, by the way, is the new browser I am testing. It's called Sigma OS. It is pretty fancy. I got all sorts of stuff that I can do. Got all my extensions, reminders, lots of keyboard shortcuts. I can do a lot of cool stuff. So far, I'm absolutely loving it. But we're not here to hear me talk about browsers. We're here to talk about APIs. And we're building a to-do API, which is a bring your own UI approach. So you want to build your own UI, you want to build a CLI, a Raycast extension, a mobile app, whatever it might be. Bring it yourself. I'm just going to build an API. It's going to be fun. Very fun. I'm going to focus in on the code. I'm going to hide my beard so I can drink coffee without anyone noticing. And we're going to dive in. So where do we start? I'll go through the data modeling. That's probably a good place to start. So let me connect my data source in PHP Storm using SQLite. So this is in GitHub, me, to-do API, database, and it's not been created, so I can't actually do it. Okay, so there is our first task, is to migrate this database. Again, that's the one thing I don't like about Laravel prompts is if, like me, you're working in this sort of view, it's really painful. It is really painful. It expects your window to be a certain size, which it never really is. It really does vary. We are in the to-do app. Yep, that is great. Awesome. To-do. We're going to give this a funky color today. We're going to call it that. Test that connection. Make sure we are connecting. Apply. Okay. We are good. I don't want to do that, but I will want to seed the database quickly. Let's go see what we have in our database. So we have users, we have tasks, and we have categories. That's it. That's all we need right now. It's going to be super simple. It's nothing super crazy. It's just I want to create some categories and I want to organize my to-dos. That's it. So without further ado, let's dive in. The first thing, this is not needed. All of this in here, it's just super not useful. So let's clean all this up. I don't need to load console commands through a roots file. Providers, I'm not using any sort of real-time stuff, so I can just delete all those channels. What else do we need? Well, we don't want to schedule anything right now, so I delete that. Come down to my config app, and we can just kind of remove that because we know we don't need that. Root service provider, we can go through this. So this home here, this is being used by the redirect if authenticated middleware. So yeah, we don't want that in our kernel. We need to make sure we remove that because we don't want to do any sort of guest stuff. We want to enforce authentication for all of the things, which means I can clean that up. I can drop that and drop the prefix. Put that on one line. and drop this down a level. This can then be a static function. This can also be a static function. Also say that we're going to return that. Right, let's just make this a little bit nicer to use. So we know that we have the rate limiter for our API. Here's our callback. Our max attempts is this. We're going to grab that and say that our key is this. And then we drop that down another level. And it looks a lot cleaner when you do it like this, right? Anything I can remove from up here? No, not really, unfortunately. So we can come back. What else do we need to clean up? App service provider. Well, we're not doing anything in here right now, so we can remove all of that. Auth service provider. We haven't registered any policies yet. We're not booting anything. We don't need the gate right now. We can clean that out. Registered events. Yeah, we'll keep that for now. Boot. And this is the default. So we can just kind of drop that. That cleans up that. And that's all of those. We can just kind of close all of those tabs. If we then come back to here and refresh, we're getting a 404 not found, which means that we can come over to here. We can delete this web, come to this, and we can just get rid of all that, get rid of this. And what I'll do is we'll do a simple GET request to here. Name is root. And we're just going to do a really quick return a ping for the time. So if we come back, you can see that we are getting a ping for the time. So to start with, we are going to stay within Insomnia a lot of the time. So let's just create a quick ping request. You make sure you can actually zoom in a little bit. That should be a little bit easier for you to see. Don't need it that big, so I can kind of focus in. So we have our URL. This returns the ping. The headers are going to be accept application JSON. There, that's good. We can save that. So we have a ping request and we know it works. We know this is working fine. Okay, make that static. And we're going to return an array. So actually using our API, what are we going to want to do? We're going to want to do some authentication. We're going to want to create our tasks, which are our to-dos. Well, we're going to want to manage tasks, really, aren't we? So full CRUD stuff. And that's the main thing, I think, is we want to authenticate and manage tasks. The way that I'm imagining working with this is, perhaps similar to, in my CLI, I might go to do add, which will give me a little option, and then I can say, here is the title, then it'll be, here is a little more content about my to-do with a link, maybe, or something. Does it need some sort of expiry? Yeah, we want to expire in, we want it to be done in 1 day. Yeah, that sort of thing. Any categories? Yeah, I want to categorize this as work. That's kind of what we're going to be aiming for here. So the first thing is going to be auth. Now, here's my composer file. I've got Sanctum installed, and that is it. I don't want to use Breeze. I don't want to use Jetstream or Passport or anything. I want to just add my own authentication in a way that's going to work for me for this project. So we're going to start, as I usually would do, with a v1 directory. And then we're going to add our roots within here. So we can declare our strict types. We can pull this in. And then we know that we're going to want to prefix auth as auth. Then we're going to want to group lots of things in here. So we can just say base path roots v1 auth.php. And then we just need to go ahead and create this in our v1. So again, we can just kind of grab that, drop that in here and start looking at those. But let's just focus now on getting this file out the way. Prefix v1 as v1 group base path roots v1 and roots.php. So now if I come ahead over here and just say a root list, we haven't got it in there, but if we then come over to our auth, we can say we're going to do a post request to login. We want to give that a name of login. We're not going to add a callback or anything yet, but now we've got v1 auth login, and we are pretty much good to start at this point. So if we come over to app HTTP, these controllers here, we can make this abstract, although we will never use it. We can go directory v1 auth and create a new PHP class called login controller. Inside our login controller, to start with, all we want is a invoke method, which will accept a request. And for now, that is it. Come over to here, and we can just say that we want to use the login controller. Simplify that, and we're going to register this over here next. So create that's a little bit big for me, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. That's better. Create a new folder. We're going to call this authentication. Add a first request, which is a post request. We're going to go to URL v1 auth login. Hey, how are you doing? It's good to see people joining and chatting. Login user. So the headers that we're going to want to accept application JSON. We're going to want our content type that we are passing to be application JSON. I always like to add connection live. It's just what I like to do. We know that when we log in, typically in Laravel, we're going to want an email and a password. This is the default. No, we're not using Filament. We are just going to have an API, fully API, all the things. I do have something planned with Filament though, so stay tuned on that one. Have a quick bit of coffee and let's dive back in. So what we need is a form request. So we can make a request. Sorry, my internet blipped for a second there. Why is it every time I go live, I have issues? Settings. General. Can I do anything? No. Okay, my next stream, I'm going to make sure that I'm not live streaming in full HD because it seems to have issues with my connection. Here's our login request, a make request, login request. That is now created. We can come over to here, we can inject this of login request. We no longer need that one. Remove that authorize. Declare some strict types. Make this final because it's never extended. So what do we want when the user needs to log in? Well, they need their email. And we need them to also pass over their password. So the email is required. It should be an email. We want to use the rule exists. The table we want to check is users. The column is email. That is all we need to do for that email. Now on the password, there's not much we really want to do other than say, yes, we want it to be required and we want it to be a string. We are allowing someone to log in. We want to control the validation for passwords on the registration, never on that login request. So when we get to here, we know they have passed their validation. So what we want to do is attempt authorization. So the way I like to do this, hey, how you doing, buddy? Is I like to use a constructor. So I use a constructor like this. And I like to pull in the auth factory. I believe it's the auth factory. So if we want to attempt authorization, at this point we can say if this auth guard attempt request only email and password. If we fail that, we want to throw an error. If we don't pass that, we want to create an API token and return it. Yeah, the way I do my versioning just works for me. It doesn't work for everyone, don't get me wrong, but it really works for me. And that's one of the important things that you got to remember when you're building anything is focus on you and your team. Focusing on, anything else just doesn't make sense. Focusing on this standard or that standard or this principle, if it slows you down and stops you doing what you need to do, it's not worth using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this read-only, which means that I can then make that a read-only class. At this point, we will need to do something, and at that point, we need to do something. So I like to create my own exceptions. We're going to create a v1 auth, and we're going to do a authentication exception. Okay, so I need to refactor and rename that because I forgot the N, because that happens apparently. There we go. This will extend just a standard exception. We'll simplify that. I like to add that in my classes just so it gives it some kind of space. So here, what we want to do is just throw a new authentication exception, which is our own one. The message we want to pass through is failed authentication. Please check your credentials. Code. Right, this is where I need a package. So Composer required, just Steve King, the SDK tools. It's a package I like to use. Obviously, I like to use it because I built it, but hey. Right, so the code is status. And we are going to go for unauthorized, pass through the value, and that's all we need. We can just go through that exception. So email fields are required and one more. So email test, password test, and valid email address at desk.com. Email is invalid. So yeah, we'll get around to this. Why is auth a factory instance? Well, I mean, I could use like the auth facade and go, you know, auth attempt and do this. You know, I could do that, but I don't like to. I like to use my dependency injection container because it's there. All the auth facade is going to do is resolve the bound instance of the auth factory anyway. So using dependency injection, I just know it's clearer. If I want to use a different approach, I can use a different approach. I got better type hinting. Yeah, it's my way, just how I do it. Hey, Adrian. So at this point, we know that, you know, we have an authenticated user at this point, right? We know we do. So now we need to create an API token and return it. So what we want to do is create some commands. So commands auth. Now you can version your commands. So maybe I'm going to have v1 in there, auth v1, and I'm going to have create token for user. Maybe I'll have something like this. We will handle it. So public function handle. We will have something like the ID for the user. And we expect to return a new access token. That is kind of what I'm thinking of doing here. Can you? I know I've got a HTTP client built in PHP Storm. I don't actually like that HTTP client. It just doesn't work for me, so I don't use it. So now I can say I also want to pull in this as my command. Now this I could use like a command bus. I could use any other sort of pattern. It's an action. I just call them commands because they're write operations. So at this point, I get my user is user query find or fail. The ID is user. ID. That without got a user. But what I need to do to make sure that this works the way I want it to, I need to just kind of override what comes back, because this will bring back a model or builder instance, which is fine, but then I don't have any sort of auto completion. So I want to return create a token. Now the name needs to be something. The abilities needs to be passed in as an array, and whether it expires. I need to think about this. Okay, so why commands auth v1? So all of my auth commands will live in one place. I can then just separate them by v1, v2, v3, v4. It's just a naming convention. It's just a namespace. You can move it. It's just a personal thing. You kind of, yeah, it doesn't matter so much, if I'm completely honest. So what we want to do here is we're going to pass through the ID. So over here, we're going to start creating it and just kind of work with it. So token equals this command handle where the ID is this auth guard ID. At this point, we've got a token. We can make sure that that goes through as a string. What else do we want to pass? Well, we need to give our token a name. And the easiest way to do this is going to be to pass this through here, like this. So our name can then just be name. The way I'd like to do this for me is going to be name, request. Can you get a referrer easily? No. Headers. Get. Right. Let's come over here. Headers. There's a nice way to get the headers. I just can't remember it. So what I'm going to do, try jump here. Request headers all. Comment that out a minute. And I need to come over to my Cedar and make sure that I have a record that I can use. So let's make sure we've got a user that we can log in with. User factory create. Name is just going to be me, of course, because I'm using it. Email will just be my email. So now I can just say ADB seed. I've now got a user so that if I come over to here, I can use myself. So that things will pass. So user agent. So we could use like the user agent. I think that might be a good case to use it. Yeah, I prefer Insomnia to Postman just kind of, it's forcing too much of their thinking, and Insomnia just does it. It just works. So for this, I just want to be able to get that user agent. I'm not sure if there is a quick way to do that. Yes, user agent. Of course there is. Ooh, user, no. User agent. Thank you. Let's make sure that is also being passed as a string for type reasons. So at this point, failed authentication, please check your credentials. Then, of course, if I come down to env, we get app debug and we just say like false, for example. It comes through differently. But we will kind of handle that later. So at this point, we know we've got an authenticated user. We can create them a token. The permissions, I'm just going to default to all permissions, abilities. That's all that matters. That is the only thing that really matters at this point, is this part here. Let me grab that. I'm going to put that on one line to make it a little bit nicer to kind of look at. There we go. That just keeps it a little bit cleaner. So we got an ID and a name coming from here, ID and name. We got a guard that works like this. We could even push this to the request like Laravel Breeze does. I'm not going to because I like to see all the logic in my controller that's being actually handled. So now I can go through and say, okay, at this point, I've got a token and I want to return a response. So the way I like to do responses is come over to here, directory, responses, v1. There, we're going to have a shared kind of, we'll have auth token response. So let me dive in a second. So what we've got is app HTTP responses v1 auth. And then in our commands, we've got app commands auth v1. So the way that HTTP works, I am mapping a request to a certain class, right? I know I'm going to have v1 auth something. It makes sense to map it that way. But then when it comes to commands, I'm doing actions. I'm performing some sort of logic. And I'm always going to have auth logic. It's not going to change naming based on versioning. It's always going to be auth v1. I want to create a token for a user, or auth v1, create token for multiple users. Auth v2, create token. I want to make that more abstract. And it allows me to keep that structure quite easily. So my token response. We are going to implement responsible, which will have this toResponse method here. This is going to return a JSON response, but we need our constructor. So public function construct. There we go. And what we need a private read-only new access token as the data. Now we're also going to want our status code. We're going to pass through a status code, but we want to have a default status, right? Always going to need some sort of default status. Wrong status. Import that one. There we go. And I can make that all read-only. I can just drop that over there. Come over here and return a new JSON response where my data is something and my status is this status value done. So this bit here, status is never read, only written. I am very aware of that. I don't know why it's even complaining about that. Oh, it's gone now. Perfect. So this new access token, what do we want to do with that? Well, we want to pass that back to the user so they can use it. So this data, and we want to get that plain text token. So our response will come back and it will look a little bit like this. It will be a JSON object where it'll have token and lots of stuff in there. And that's all we care about, really. That bit. That is how it's going to respond. It's going to have a status. And we're also going to want to attach some headers. The way I like to do this is to create a factory here. If you've tuned into one of my streams before, you might recognize this. So we'll have a header factory. And within here, we're going to have a public function default, which will return an array. This will be static. This will return default set of headers, which will be content type. And we're going to default to application bnd dot API plus JSON. That's kind of like our default there. Now this is going to complain. So I can do this and this. If I could spell today. And that will stop all of that. And what we can do, we can actually version this. So we can say public function, my v1 is going to be, I want to merge defaults with something else. And that's going to return an array. My bad. Again, this should be static. Plain because it's final and all that good stuff. Where did that go? Where did it go? Here it is. So we can come to here and we can say, we can pretty much guarantee at this stage it's going to be a string thing. A string thing. That is the coolest sentence I've said today. So our token response is a v1 response. So our headers can be header factory v1. And what we could even do is, pass in an array of defaults to v1 that we might want to use, and we can just change this on. We can update that. We're going to want this to be a string again. Array merge. Don't even need that. We can just do it on the fly. So maybe we want to say, okay, so we want, X custom header to be boop. We could quite easily do this on a use case scenario basis thing. Easy to do is what I'm trying to explain here. So here's our token response. We can come back to our login controller and we're going to say return new token response. So the data is going to be token. But in reality, we could simplify that by just dropping that in there and removing that because we don't actually need the temporary variable. This then returns something that is responsible. Squiggle has gone. We have done our authorization check. We're only passing through the logged in user. And then we're getting the user agent. We're returning that token response. So if I come to here, that fails. If I pass through password, I get a token. If I come back to my database and look at personal access tokens, app model user, and it's for this implementation, I now have a token I can use. So what I might quickly do actually is I hate morphs. They're horrible, but I'm using Sanctum. I've got to use it. So I need to come to here and I need to start looking at like a morph map. So we'll go to boot. This doesn't return anything. So is it model morph map or something? Let's go to the Laravel docs. Laravel.com docs. And we're going to say morph map, relation enforce map. Okay, cool. Relation enforce morph map, where the map is, we go double check, post, blah, blah. Okay, so user is going to be that. That is great. This works. So now if I just kind of migrate fresh, get rid of them, seed, come back to here. Great, I've got a token again. I can come over to personal access tokens, refresh. It's not working. Why isn't it working? Rob, good questions. I'm going to quickly show you this question because a lot of people ask me this. Why are we using auth guard and not auth or auth user? So the way that I do this is zoom in to highlight it. I use my constructor, and what I do, I pull in the auth factory, which is illuminate contracts auth factory. This allows me to then come down and say this auth guard, I know where that's coming from, and attempt. Like if, for example, if I use auth helper, what does the auth helper do underneath? Click through. So function auth guard null. If is null, return a new version or the bound version of the auth factory, which is this one, which is what we're already pulling through. So by doing that, all we're doing is we're doing this without the dependency injection. Now, if we use the auth facade, for example, what does the auth facade do? This will do the same thing as the helper. Return the facade accessor. It's going to return the auth manager, which will return the bound version of the authentication factory, in which case it will return this, which is what I'm injecting. So it just makes it so much easier not to kind of use those helpers or facades and just say, actually, I know you're going to do this. So just when you create this class, just give me an instance. I don't want to have to waste my time on let you create it for me. You know, when I call this helper or call this facade, just inject it because I know I need it. And that's why I do that. Right, back to it. No, that's so many people ask it because people are like, why do you just use this or use that? It's like, because it's doing the same thing. And that's why. Right, so I know now that I've got a token for my user, I can perform actions against my API. So I'm enforcing a map. For some reason, this isn't picking it up. Nope, now it is. User. Ha ha ha! We got it. We got you. Our user is there. There is their tokens. I'm using ULIDs. Don't ask. I just like them. Login request. So what I also like to do here is say model should be strict. When should it be strict? When this app environment is not production, basically. So that'll return whether it's in production or not, and it will just basically just count itself out like should be strict for so true. If it's in production, it will say true. If it's not, it'll say false, and that'll enforce it to be strict in production. So you just kind of say question mark false. It's funny because it's true. The old joke, as we have heard. So that is one way we do that. Then I also like to just another thing, just to add more. We say JSON resource. We say without wrapping. I don't wrap my standard JSON resources because they're meta resources for me, how I use them. So now I can remove that. I can come over to here. I know I've got a token, so I can grab that, come over to my environment and say that my token is this. So my next request can be authenticated, basically. So I'll probably add more around that later. But let's start by coming back to here. We know we've done some authentication. I'm not going to go through the whole auth stuff because that's tomorrow's stream. But my next part I want to focus on here is I want to be able to get tasks, right? That's the whole purpose of this app. As tasks group, almost said Groot. You can tell what's on my mind. I am Groot. And tasks. I can grab that. Come over here. Create that, which is great. Or Groot. Put that in, and I can start working with my routes. So I want to get all of my tasks. You know, it's a standard thing. You know, list all of my tasks I have available. Make sure that has showed up. V1 tasks, fantastic. Come over to HTTP controllers V1. We can then say tasks. Get a new one. We're going to call that an index controller because we are just giving the index. Public function invoke. This will accept a request as a request. And then it will return something. However, there's one thing we didn't add, and that is middleware. Middleware is vital when you're building any sort of API because it tells the application any rules that you might want to do. Because without that, literally anyone can go in and get a list of their, any tasks, basically. So we need to be able to say, I only want the authenticated user's task. I can't do that if I don't have middleware. I can't enforce it. So let's come back to here. We can say private, read-only, authenticatable. We're using auth again. I don't really want to use auth as a name, so I've used it, but I'm gonna stick with it for now. So if I just quickly do a quick die dump on this auth, this is going to give me something. So I can show you. So I can come here and I can say index controller class replace. Come over to here and new folder tasks. We're going to get from our URL v1 tasks headers and add. You'll get accept application JSON. And we want our connection to be keep alive, and we want our authorization to be a bearer token using our token. Send that. So we have got the authenticated user record without having to call anything in because we have got middleware and we've injected the authenticated user. So that means what I can do is I can actually get certain things off that user just by doing this, which means that I can come over to here and I can say, okay, I want some queries for tasks, v1 tasks, and I want to get tasks by user ID. That is what I want to do, so I can do that. Public function handle. This will pass through the ID for that user. And what I'm expecting is a collection back. There it is. almost missed it. Return task query where user ID is ID get. Now this is one way you can do it, and it works because if I come back to here, let me just grab this. I can come to here and I can say, okay, let's inject this query. I'm going to need it anyway. Here's my query. For now, I'm just going to return it as is. This query handle ID this auth get auth identifier. And if I just do that, I'm going to return an empty array because I don't have any tasks. But this query is useful in many places. Where else might I want to get these scoped list of tasks? Maybe in a few places. So instead, why don't I return wrong builder, import the eloquent builder, drop the get. So what I can do in my controller here instead, paginate. Or here I can get, because this is where I'm building my queries, but this is where I need to access the queries. So this might make more sense to be executed outside of that query class, is what I'm trying to say there. Next, what do we want? We need a handy package. Composer require McDonald's JSON API, and the latest version is beta v4. That is now installed. So I want to go make a resource v1 tasks. Well, actually, no, just task resource, really, isn't it? Sorry, task resource. Also, I am going to want a standard date resource, because that will be useful in many, many places. And I'm also going to want a response. Now, this is probably the last thing I'm going to do for this stream, because I want to make sure I've got time for other things today. But if I come over to here, V1, we've got our task resource over there, responses, V1. What we're going to have is a paginated response. This is going to implement responsible, which means we want that. We're going to need some data, so public function construct. Come over here, and we want to say private read only length. Link to where paginator. Is that the right one? Or okay, we'll use abstract paginator, might be better. As the data, and then the private read-only status. Okay, there we go. So this is then a JSON response. Because we want to make sure that we can return paginated stuff, right? So return new JSON response. Data is this data. And the status is this status value, and the headers are header factory, and we're going to stick with v1 for now. So I can make that read only. Come back to here, come over to our index controller and say return new paginated response. So the data is this query handle, the ID is this get auth identifier paginate, and that is done. This is then responsible. This wants to be cast to a string by default. Cannot cast mixed to string. I hate it when it does that. So then I can grab this string valid, and there we go. It'll still complain, but you know. So it's giving me a paginated result, which that's great. Nothing wrong with that. However, we want to utilize resources. So paginated responses are really, really good for things that aren't you don't want to use some sort of resource for. What we want for this is going to be a collection response. But again, this implements responsible public function construct. Actually, no, that's not it at all, is it? My bad. Where am I? The data being passed into that. I need a resource response, really, don't I? Okay, we'll do it this way. We'll do a collection response. This is going to implement responsible public function construct. And I have a private read-only JSON API resource collection as the data. Private read-only status as wrong status again. I keep doing that. Should pick packet naming. Status. We always default status, okay. It's kind of like what I do. Let's just kind of clean that up. Oh, my bad. That. Our response here will return a JSON response. Then here we want to return a new JSON response. The data is this data. The status is this status. Value. And the headers is header factory default. So what you're probably noticing right now is we're doing a lot of two responses that all look the same. Has response. Back to here. Grab this. Drop that in there. And up here, I can say property mixed data. That'll shut that up. Property status, and that'll keep that quiet too. Now that's unused, but not that bothered. So if we come over, we can get our auth token response. We can't really change that. What we can do is drop that. Let's just put it back to how I like it. Use has response. So much cleaner. Paginated. Means I can clean this right up and be happy. It's going to say that they're only ever read, not written, because reasons, but it's not the end of the world. So let's say collection response instead of paginated response, because we can pass a paginated list into here. So the data we want is going to be a task resource collection where the resource is that. Come to this task resource, JSON API resource, delete that, declare some strict types, make it final. It takes me so long to do some of this sometimes. So 2 attributes. This is going to return an array. Attributes on my task I can pull from here. So property, we're never going to write that, so we can say that. So task as resource. So come and look at this. We've got title, status, priority, content, category, user completed that. Oh, lots to say. So what's going to be important? Well, title. We want to know the task title, right? This resource title. If I click on that title, it takes me through to here on the task model. It's great. Everything just connects up. Our priority is this resource priority value, status of this task, this resource priority value, the content of this task, this resource content. Have a look at our task. What else might we need? Category and user. That's a relationship. What we also have is a completed app. Could it be completed? Quite possible. So completed new date resource there. So we can then go what resource we want to pass through. We want to pass through this resource, completed that. So if I come over to here, declare strict types, make this final, drop that, come over to here and say, there we go. What is our resource going to be in this? So property read null or carbon interface, a resource. So human, this resource diff for humans, and the string version is this resource to date time string. And okay, we can add like a local as well if we really wanted to. This resource to date time string, time local string, like this. So there's our task resource, there's our date resource, everything's connecting up nicely. This will accept it, collection there, collection response anonymous resource collection. That is what we need. That. Bam. This is what we wanted, not that. It works for me. So there we go. That's all of that. That's all of this. And send it again. Empty. Perfect. Let's come back to our database seeder. And let's add a few. So we could say, okay, here's this user. And we want to say task factory for user. I want to create 20 like that. There we go. A migrate fresh seed. Means we're gonna have to log in again, but you know, that's easy enough. That manage the environment, and we want to update that. Come to here. We diff for humans and null. Okay, so our date resource needs to have some funky. And there we go. So we know we can get all of this, and we know that we can go to different pages, basically. So tasks, title, priority, status. I don't even know why status is saying medium. Let's come back to a task resource. Status. There we go. It's open. Here's our content. Completed. Human, string, and local. None of them are complete right now. Here we go. 1 day from now. Local string and the standard string UTC. And it makes it really easy to work with. So for now, I'm going to call that a day. I will be picking this back up tomorrow, where we're going to pick up some more. We're going to start with our authentication, getting people registered, and kind of that sort of flow, how that might work. Other than that, have a great rest of your day. I'm going to go find some food because I'm pretty hungry. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check out Treblle. We're awesome. We do API stuff. Make sure you like as well. Like and comment if you enjoyed the content. If you didn't enjoy the content, let us know so I can kind of work on some feedback and maybe make it better next time. And as usual, subscribe to get notified for the next video. Other than that, yeah, have a great day. And I will see you later. Goodbye.